The pressure of load shedding is becoming too much to bear as more businesses are shutting down. A beloved restaurant in Durban will close its doors this coming Sunday, and it's all because of the financial constraints caused by the impact of South Africa's power crisis. Newzroom Afrika's Karinda Jagmohan, she spoke to the owner of this restaurant and began by asking her why it is that the restaurant has decided to shut its doors. And this particular business person has also a message for the Finance Minister. So let's set the scene for this conversation with this conversation.
We do not have the finances to continue funding it. We are sinking in debt, which makes no sense. So you, like I've mentioned earlier on, you can't be taking from one business to sustain another. Then, you can only do that for so long. But when it's causing a huge strain on the other businesses, that's a problem. Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned you've had to, over the years, deal with COVID-19, the unrest, the floods, paying fee after fee. Is there anything that could have been done by the powers that be government to help you move forward, stay open?
I think if they were strong enough, these changes, we shouldn't be making changes now. If we had a solution or fixed the problem which they were fully aware of years ago, we would not be in this predicament. I'm a small business, but we make contributions. There are more small businesses than there probably are, what we can imagine, but you just can't, you just can't.
And, of course, we have our Finance Minister, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, watching you right now. What is your message to him at this sad time of your life?
Mr. Minister, love South Africa enough to make the change. We don't all have the privilege of leaving this country. It's a beautiful country. We travel South Africa quite a bit, and there's no place in the world like this. Not that I've ventured to many places overseas, but there's enough pictures and media to tell you that. So my ending words to you, Mr. Minister, is love South Africa enough to make the changes it needs so everybody can survive and live equally.
Minister Godongwana, good morning to you. So let's kick off the conversation with your response to this business owner who has been forced to shut down operations in large part because of load shedding.
Before answering that question, Xoli, let me start by saying we have an understanding, and correctly so, that load shedding is a major problem to the economy. You will recall that I prefaced both the medium-term budget policy statement in October and the main budget speech in February with what I called a key binding constraints. The first one being electricity, second one being the logistics challenges, and thirdly, crime. So we're quite aware of that. It's clear the intensity of load shedding is becoming a problem. You will recall that also in the budget, we estimated that the growth will be about 9%. And my suspicion is that we're going to revise those numbers down precisely because of the intensity of load shedding. I'm putting that broad picture, and we come to the specific, to the small business. Mindful of that fact, in the budget speech, we provided a tax incentive for a business, a small business, to provide for a solar system in which they can claim 125% rebate from government. It's precisely small business like that. Secondly, we have also provided on the supply side financing mechanism via the bounce back scheme for small and medium enterprise to be able to get a loan and put the systems in place.
All right, Minister, I'm told there is a slight problem with your microphone, so whilst the team tries to resolve that, in the meantime, let me try and perhaps recap what has been said by Eskom, the Eskom executive that has been briefing, just so we continue with the theme of load shedding. The team at Eskom making it clear that stage 8 load shedding will now be introduced. The minister, you've heard him a few moments ago talking about the intensity of load shedding. Well, that is not going to let up. The team at Eskom, the leadership at Eskom, suggesting very strongly that upwards from stage 6, we're now going to face the possibility of stage 8 load shedding. All right, Minister, at least that sound problem has been fixed. Let me ask you a follow-up question then. Why should South Africans trust that your government is going to be able to resolve this issue? You yourself have just spoken about the intensity of load shedding.
Look, from a Treasury perspective, we've taken a view since last year that we need a better understanding of the problem so that I should be able to answer this question properly for you. What have we done? We've said we wanted an independent assessment of what are the key challenges in Eskom. We have then appointed a renowned international company from Germany to do that assessment. That will be giving us a final assessment in July. Okay, probably too late for whatever stages people are talking about here. But for me, is to have a better sense what are the key challenges in Eskom and advised by experienced people in order to take the necessary step of making sure that this government can and contribute to the debate. Is not my line function.
It may not be your line of function, Minister.
I'm saying contribute, because I can't, I'm part of the government, so I must take responsibility for that. But I want to enter that debate from an informed basis.
Yeah. I want to move on from this subject, but the announcement that has just come, that stage 8 load shedding should be anticipated, talks exactly to your point about the intensity of load shedding. How do you react? What do you tell businesses when they are now told that beyond what they have already experienced, we are now going to even higher stages of load shedding?
Let me just say, from where I sit, I'm not an engineer. What I can do, we've done all we could from a Treasury perspective again to contribute to the resolution of the problem. And how did we do that? Is by taking the data of Eskom, so that Eskom should be able to have sufficient resources to upgrade their plans, make sure that they can achieve the required whatever levels of electricity availability.
Yeah. All right. So let's focus the discussion then perhaps on what you can do as Treasury, which is to finance our way out of this crisis. The ministers in the energy cluster, they seem to be at odds about how to get out of this mess. Gwede Mantashe wants car power ships. Minister Ramokgopa wants the refurbishment of old power stations. Pravin Gordhan, we know he's a strong proponent of renewable energy. You are the man who holds the purse strings. Which of these options are you willing to finance?
All of the above. Okay.
Do you have the money?
No, all of the above. Let me just take you a step back. We have created an environment where the relevant institution, which is Eskom, I can't go to Eskom and go to a power station and sort boilers and all of those things. What I can do is to make resources available for Eskom to achieve that. Let me tell you where I believe Eskom has the resources to do, and one of the CFOs on TV saying the resources are available. Two forms of resources that have been made available to Eskom. The South African public is going to pay 18.6% for electricity increases, which makes money available to Eskom on a huge scale. Eskom
for a service they don't get.
Eskom was supposed to get to pay this financially 78 billion rand debt. That debt was being taken over by the sovereign. What that means, it leaves Eskom with sufficient liquidity to be able to maneuver and upgrade the plans and come back to those questions. When I'm saying all of the above, because there's a tendency to make to treat these things as exclusive. Mandasha's car powership is an temporal intervention, so that in between, while we are developing increased capacity in the economy, the car powership can provide the necessary cushion That's the first point. Minister Ramokgopa's point, again, is not in conflict with Minister Mantashe. Minister Ramokgopa is saying we can't take off power plant and decommission them in the context of load shedding. So those are complementary. There's nothing that precludes, again, the development of renewables. Minister Mantashe is going to issue whatever window and so on for renewables. So all of these things talk to each other.
Is that a firm cabinet decision, the car power ships? And I'm asking you this question because the Daily Maverick is reporting this week that Transnet has been directed to find harbour space for 3 gas-to-power ships for the next 20 years.
Not for the next 20 years. That's a temporary intervention.
Yeah.
The reason they wanted a 20-year period was to limit the cost. The shorter the time period, the costs are going to be high. So we've got a committee called NECOM. In NECOM, which coordinates the electricity thing, there's agreement that we must use whatever is possible to increase electricity available to the South African nation.
So again, I'm looking for a crystal clear answer on the car power ships. Is that final now?
I'm giving a clear answer. We can't then micromanage Mantashe when we say we need new capacity. Mantashe has got to check whether it's a car power ship, whether it's an emergency a gas or anything. There is source of energy that's within his purview.
Minister?
Have said.
Is it a cabinet decision that car power ships is going ahead?
It's a cabinet decision that Mantashe has got to find electricity for the country. What emergency measures he does, we give him flexibility to that. I can say, if you ask me, I'm fully behind that decision.
I'm going to interchangeably say, in your hat now, or as senior member of the ANC, whilst we're on this energy crisis, you sit in the NEC. What is the hold-up about giving the Minister of Energy the necessary powers to move with speed in order to allow him to make the necessary interventions, as was announced that this is an urgent matter? What's the hold-up?
The National Executive of the ANC does not micromanage government. The decision, the assignment of functions is a prerogative of the President. Now, the President is making his own assessment as to what are the other powers that should be. In terms of Section 97, I think it's 97.
What's taking so long?
And then you may ask that question to the President, but I think those powers and assignment of functions cannot be an ANC function. The President has got the powers to assign functions to all their ministers, to all his ministers.
To take you back to an initial question I asked you about why South Africans then should trust that this government is going to take us out of this crisis. The President announced this minister some time ago, only to find that this minister is lacking powers. The matter of energy insufficiency in South Africa is an urgent matter, Minister Godongwana. Why is the President taking so long to do such a simple thing?
Let me just say, if you hope the Minister of Electricity coordinates all work, including us, right, there's no reason that even as we speak, that momentum should not be made to deal with electricity. It can't hinge on whether the Minister of Electricity has a new assignment or not. For instance, if he checks about the financing, I mean, we had a discussion with him about the diesel, and I explained what is happening on that point. We're going to talk about a number of things. We are working in support of some of the things that the minister needs to do cannot be easily assigned.
Okay, talking about diesel, it's an interesting point. How much are we looking at for this winter period? How much have you allocated for diesel?
I don't allocate for diesel. Eskom allocates for diesel. But what I can tell you is how much has been given to Eskom. To my knowledge, the prior 18.6% in it is built in it at 18 billion rand for diesel. Okay? 8 billion rand for diesel. Given the liquid space now Eskom has put an additional amount to that 8 billion to make sure that they are ready to provide diesel.
A collective figure? What does that take up to?
To my knowledge, it's about 30 billion.
30 billion budgeted for diesel to burn this winter.
Yeah. In this winter.
Let's talk about the South African economy. In your budget vote recently in Parliament, you echoed the IMF's sentiments that the world is entering a perilous phase because of the rise of cost of living. What is government doing to shield South Africans from this unbearable financial state?
Government cannot afford to shield everybody. What government can do is to do in a targeted way to focus on the vulnerable, which is the poor. Now, what are we doing in that regard? First and foremost, as you are aware, we've increased the social grants. Secondly, we have provided, as you are aware, the unemployed with the social relief grant. Thirdly, we have had the public employment programs of a different kind, which are about 30 billion rand, which is employing those people. So that's a massive. And fourthly, we provide for what is called indigent in our support for the vulnerable for this cost of things such as electricity and so on and so on. The total cost of that basket is 70 billion. Now, if you make a total of all of those things, the impact of cushioning the poor is massive.
Do you have a round figure of the people who rely purely on social grants in order to deal with the fact that they are unable to find jobs?
I think the estimate is about 18 million. 18
million people rely on social grants. I'm asking you this question, Minister, because recently I had a conversation with Magda Vichetska, an established business person from South Africa. And she is saying government cannot be patting itself on the back by saying we're providing for those who cannot put bread on the table by giving social grants. If anything, it proves the incompetence of this government by putting people on social grants when, in fact, you should be creating conditions for jobs to be created so that people are absorbed into jobs.
Well, I mean, it's a false argument, right? And no empirical evidence would suggest that there's no government which does not provide that. If that is logic, that providing social grant proves incompetence, all governments across the globe are incompetent. I think that's a false narrative. So creating employment is a critical issue. But when I'm saying one of the kings, we must accept that reality. The reason we've been provide support for the unemployed, we understand the structural challenges in the employment situation. We've got to deal with those structural challenges and be able to create jobs.
The World Economic Forum this January warning that the cost of living crisis is going to be the biggest global risk over the next 2 years. Are you worried that South Africans will soon take to the streets because of the unaffordability of basic goods?
Look, as you have said, this problem is a global crisis. And some of it started before the Russian war. With the Russian war, that exacerbated the cost of all products that we buy. We accept that global reality. I'm worried about the cost of living, not because I'm worried people are going to start. I'm not saying they won't. But I'm worried about the cost of living precisely because it's affecting people negatively. So no one with a clean conscience would not be more worried about that.
A banking index that tracks the take-home pay of South Africans. It came out yesterday suggesting that salaries have stagnated over the past 5 years. Now, this is the reality of many South Africans. The question, though, is why should government employees enjoy an above-inflation increase that they are calling for, because they're not wavering on that.
Let me just say we've finished that part. We've settled with the public sector unions. You will recall that from 2018 to now, they've absorbed a lower increase. So there's no reason, like all human beings, for them not to demand that moving forward they should be cushioned and also be compensated for the past. That thing has been done. But let me come back. The excessive demands that, for instance, you get from the unions in ESCOM are definitely unwarranted in an environment where the company itself is bankrupt and we've tried to bail it out. Secondly, when these workers can't give us, say, electricity. So there should be some sort of sensitivity on their part.
That's a sense of worry from where I sit. You are worried that something might erupt because of their excessive demands, as you say.
I'm saying their excessive demands are putting unnecessary pressure on ESCOM, when all our efforts should be directed towards getting ESCOM functioning properly and getting the electricity properly. Those workers should be working with us, in fact, in this year, to make sure that we get ESCOM right so that their future is secured long term.
When you say the matter has been resolved, give us the rands and cents of what increases do they stand to gain.
I'm not sure about ESCOM 1. When I'm saying the one that has been resolved are those workers that are directly employed by government. We have had an agreement there and settled a two-wage agreement, which is quite useful for us. I can easily in the medium-term budget policy statement project the increase for the next year. So that, to me, has been a useful exercise. The ballpark figure for them is 37 billion now. 37 billion rand?
Yeah. And that takes up the money for salaries of government employees to an amount of what? Just
about 760 billion.
Is that affordable going forward?
No.
But you have no choice.
Let me take another point. What we need to do is a better understanding of this nature of the public service. Okay? In 2019, the OECD ran kind of a survey and came to and look what are the salaries of South Africa compared to others. We sit at the higher range, closer to Denmark and Norway, the Swedish social democratic countries, in terms of that package. But here's an interesting thing. When they look at per capita, how many employees per population, we sit far that back. What does that tell you? It tells you that your problem is not the headcount, your problem is the salary range. I'm going to come back to that. A third related problem which has been arguing is that we've got a whole range of proliferation of small entities that get money from the fiscus, who employ about 160,000 people. So we've got to balance this, grow the number of nurses, grow the number of teachers, grow the number of police, but begin to restructure that particular sector.
I'm moving on from the subject of salaries, but I can't do that without asking whether you plan to put a cap on the increases that people like yourself, the ministers, seem to enjoy, these unending increases, because that's why government workers down below are saying we can't accept that we will not get increases when ministers who already live lavishly continue to get pay rises.
Let me just dispel this myth, because journalists propagate this thing that these ministers are getting increases every year, and therefore workers and the ministers have not had an increase for a while. The increase we gave them last time was for 2021. The increase that have been gazetted now by the Remuneration Committee is for 2022. Now, I want to make that clear that they've not have an increase for a while. So it's inaccurate. Secondly, that gazette that has been published does not cover ministers. It covers up to a magistrate. That all public officials which are paid via that thing up to a magistrate. It may well be, if you ask me my view, if asked my view, I would prefer a sliding scale where the lower guys up to magistrate get that 3.8%. As you go up, the increase reduces.
I want to move on to corruption.
Yeah.
The war on fixing municipal finances. It's not being won. Give us a reason, again, to believe you when you say your efforts are starting to produce results, because the municipalities are in a much worse state than they have been over the years.
The main challenge is political. Okay? It's political. Because if you go into any municipalities, you find the footprints of the leadership, whether it's in that region, whether it's in the province, and so on. And therefore, undermining the proper governance of municipalities. The third, which is related to this one, the second one, is that if municipalities cannot be held accountable and their leadership cannot be held accountable, we will continue to have a crisis. Let me give you an indication. We have 257 municipalities. 175 of those municipalities have taken a decision, what is called unfunded mandate. In other words, we pass a budget and say we will fund things we don't have money to fund. Right? An example, we had a fight with Mangaung when they say they're going to create a new police division. Fine, it's within their period, but they don't have the money for it. So those are some of the things that we need to be sorting.
So how do you fix the problem? Because you talk about...
The problem is to get insulate municipality governance from political interference. Secondly, hold these councils accountable for taking decisions which are putting the municipalities in financial distress.
That's a story we've heard for many years.
I'm not saying you have not heard that story, but I'm saying that's what we need to do. Yesterday in the NSOP, I called on all political parties, because not a single political party. The mess that we're having in Joburg, I was addressing some mayors now, Metro Council, said, I'm not even sure whether you'll be mayors in the next week. So that sort of instability is caused by political parties, which we need to talk to help us transition.
You spoke about the modernization of the public procurement system. How does that help in curbing corruption?
Let me just give an indication. A couple of weeks ago, we were in the World Bank. The World Bank assisted Colombia to put a nice IT system which, for instance, tracked a new company which was formed exactly as the tender was being advertised. So modernizing presupposes that you can even track those corrupt activities at an early stage of the procurement phase.
SAA, the Competition Commission, has come out recently to say we are giving a conditional approval to this SAA Takatso deal. What are the next steps from government?
No, that's an operational issue which is handled by the Department of Public Enterprises.
But we know
the part that I deal with is how much of the SA debt should be settled by when.
And that's the part I would like for you to answer, because it's 3.5 billion.
It's 2.4 now. But if you can calculate over the years, we've pumped about 14 billion rand, 49 billion rand in SA.
And so how much are you willing to give towards
For now, we've made provision for 2.4 billion to clear out some of SAA debt.
Do you think that SAA will still require that there be a private equity partner that is going to hold the majority while government holds on to 49%?
To be honest, it's not my call. Right? To be honest, it's not my call. If you ask me, given that SAA now is operational and we've cleared out its debt with some of its asset base, I would probably think differently.
Let's talk a bit of politics, Mr. Godongwana. What would the economic impact of a diplomatic fallout between South Africa and the United States be, in your calculations?
Let me paint the unlikely scenario. Yeah. I'm saying the unlikely because that's what the media is talking about, is the unlikely scenario. That unlikely scenario is if the USA were to say we're moving with secondary sanctions on South Africa, that would have serious implications both in terms of the AGOA trade and both in terms of the financial flows between ourselves and the USA, which are massive. Mm-hmm. And secondly, there will be a market reaction to that. That market reaction will have also implications for our debt, our stock of debt, and our and interest that we're paying may jump up, and therefore upset the fiscal framework. I'm saying that is the unlikely scenario. The likely scenario is that we are talking to the USA government in different forms. Let me just talk about myself. When Secretary Yellen came here in January, she came here in January, she raised this meeting in the formal way of how governments operate, talk to each other, raised this matter. And I undertook to investigate, and I spoke to the President about it. And the President told me what he's doing. And these are the decisions. First, he asked his own ministers to give their version, which they did. Mm-hmm. And the Americans are sticking to their gun. And then the President taking the decision then that he's going to set up an inquiry so that we harmonize these facts. Mm-hmm. Secondly, send Dr. Mfumadi to the USA. And that message in those discussions, fortunately, the ambassador was present in some of those meetings. So the reason he delayed going there is because there was a recess. So he wanted to go at a time when the legislatures are also back. So Dr. Mfumadi has spoken to CIA, the chief security advisor to the president, some lawmakers in the USA. My belief is that we've crossed an area where there's tension between ourselves and the USA government.
I like it that you talk about Secretary Yellen and the conversations you've heard with her. What is America most worried about when looking at South Africa and the kind of posture we seem to be giving out to the world?
Let me just tell you an interesting story. The Americans are not worried our posture on neutrality on the war. Accept that. That's a sovereign decision you can take as a state. But if you provide arms to Russia, we are crossing that line of neutrality. You know? That's what they were worried about. Mm-hmm. That if now we begin to provide arms to Russia, we are crossing the line of neutrality.
Can I stop you for a moment? Yeah. The provision of arms, or the allegation of providing arms to Russia, are you saying that this is something that was discussed even with Janet Yellen when you met with her some time ago? It's not a thing that arises now.
It's not a thing that arises now.
But where do they get this information?
No. Ambassador, and when I met Janet Yellen, she says, here's the problem, but the person who's got the facts is the ambassador. And the ambassador told the story in that meeting in January. So that's why we were worried about the posture the ambassador is taking, as if it's something new.
Do you think AGOA is being used by America as some kind of bargaining chip for South Africa to toe the line in the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Not to my knowledge. Mm-hmm. What has been happening in most of this trade discussion with Minister Patel is at liberty to explain, is that people are beginning to reclassify South Africa and say, but guys, you're using benefits of low-income countries when in fact you should be graduating out of that. So, which has got nothing to do with treating them about so that we should not be neutral. No.
Can I talk about the relationship between South Africa and Russia? And the specific question is around this. For some time, the ANC has been unable to pay its staff because of financial constraints. Now, reports came recently that donations to the ANC from a United Manganese Kalahari mine, which is allegedly owned by a Putin ally, could potentially be influencing the ANC's posture or outlook towards Russia. No. Is there any truth to that?
Here's the truth. UMK is a manganese company in Northern Cape. Right? Whatever that guy is, if he's a friend of Putin, is correct. He's a partner in that business.
What is his nationality?
No. He's a Russian. I'm saying there's this Russian who's an investor in UMK. ANC via Chancellor House is an investor in the same company. So if Chancellor House gets its dividends and then decide to fund ANC, it's got nothing to do with the influence of this guy.
Is that how the ANC resolved its financial crisis?
No. The ANC is still in financial crisis. What we do not do is like anybody else when this new act was imposed. Most political parties cut their expenditure to the point, even reducing staff. Most of other political parties. What we do not do is to reorganize the ANC in such a manner it can be an ANC that operates within the existing Political Funding Act.
I've asked this question of the minister in the presidency, and I'd like to ask it of you as well. When this conflict between Russia and Ukraine is over, how would South Africa, when history is written, like to be remembered as having contributed towards its resolution? Because right now, these allegations of arms being given to Russia or sold to Russia, it's leaving a sour taste in the mouth.
Let's leave that for the outcome of the investigation. Because if indeed that allegation is proved correctly, it means some people acted illegally without the approval of government. I'll tell you how South Africa operates in the arms space. There's an arms control committee which approves the sale of arms and where we buy arms. No record of that. You will see the statement released by the President in responding to the Busa letter. He makes that point clearly, that our record of the Arms Control Committee did not show that. For that reason, any of that thing cannot be legal. And therefore, in that context, once the investigation is complete, we will then have the final truth, because we hope that the Americans will also submit their information to that inquiry.
Are you in favor of the Russian president coming to South Africa for a summit? I know you're going to say it's not your terrain, but the reactions from the Americans, or the unsettled behavior being demonstrated by Americans, that's saber rattling, as some observers will say. That's America saying, if you continue in this way with your relationship with Russia, it's going to put you in an invidious position when it comes to bilateral trade.
The Americans are aware that South Africa is a member of the BRICS countries, and therefore South Africa cannot isolate Russia from that club. All of those countries in BRICS accept that Russia is part of that. That's the first part. The second part is the Americans are not a member of the ICC, which, as said, Putin must be charged. The Americans are not a member of the ICC, so they can't be telling us to send people to the ICC when they themselves are not members.
And South Africa has an obligation to arrest them.
No. It cannot be enforced by a non-member. That's the point I'm trying to tell you. South Africa has got an obligation in terms of the Rome Statute to, if Putin is coming here, to arrest unless any illegal arrangement is done. If he comes, that can create a constitutional crisis, because our constitution will say he must be arrested. So the president has set up a team which is chaired by the Deputy President, to look into how do we handle this matter. And fortunately, I'm a member of that committee.
All right. Minister Godongwana, I want to thank you for your time, but let me circle back to the initial conversation, and that's the power crisis. I'd like you to tell us, in all honesty, from what you know and what you experience as a government minister, apart from the president, whom we know for a fact is exempted from load shedding, do ministers sit in the dark when all of us are also sitting in the dark?
I'll tell you, I live in Alberton, not in the government compound. All right? I live in Alberton, not in the government compound. Experience that. You go to Pretoria, some of the ministers will tell you they're experiencing that. By the way, recently, for a week, Minister Mamlugo and Mandasha didn't have even water for that matter. So, ministers experience all of this on a day-to-day basis.
Enoch Godongwana, let me thank you very much.
Thank you
for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks indeed. Minister of Finance, telling us that they also experience load shedding. In some instances, even water cuts. You'll tell me if you believe him.